This first is just kind of laying the framework for things of where we're wanting to move from this conventional row crop stuff to really diverse integrated systems. Restoring that monocrop land to life-enhancing, producing systems. So, the conventional paradigm of everything, I'm not going to dwell too long on this. We know all the problems of soil loss and pesticide use and soil compaction and yada yada.
Yeah.
Deforestation, probably one of the leading causes of deforestation is conventional agriculture, whether it's grazing or monocrops.
Sure. Carbon loss.
And more importantly, I think it's communities disconnect from their food shed. It's like monocrops becomes commodities, and then it's like distributed, and people don't know where their food comes from. So if it's smaller farms, they're more integrated. It's local. People know where their food comes from. They're connected to the farmers and so forth. So that's where we want to go to. Causing dead zones and all your pesticides and nutrient loss in the soils. So that's where we want to go is reversing this, and farmers can be a lot of the solution to all this stuff as well if it's done properly. Reversing climate change. By increasing soil carbon, you can dramatically, or soil life, you can dramatically increase the soil carbon. I think I heard if you increase soil carbon by 1%.
1.6 is what I heard.
What's that? If you increase it 1%, you sequester 20,000 tons of carbon per acre.
Yeah. What I got with that is for every 1% additional carbon density in the soil, you get from 16 to 27,000 gallons of water retention capacity.
Oh yeah, that too, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. So it goes hand in hand. Your organic matter, your soil carbon, your water holding capacity, your nutrient density of your food, it all starts increasing. Yeah, exactly.
It also means actually when it rains, that water is actually
infiltrated as hell. You don't get erosion and all of that stuff. Yeah. So this has been the trend. The bad land management, deforestation, overgrazing, overtilling, just creates deserts, right? And it's like, you can crop for a while, but then pretty soon it's all gone. So we need to move this back towards the restoration track. Towards diversity, towards water retention, towards forested systems, towards integrated animals into your systems. And all of a sudden those trends the feedback loops become much more dramatic, and you can reverse things very quickly. Looking at a small scale farm as an ecosystem, which our farm is also a biodynamic farm, and in biodynamics, you're looking at your farm as one organism. So it's like the farm has the lungs, the liver, the heart, the head, the skin, all of those components go together to make an organism. And so all of that feeds back into itself. I'm not going to talk too much about biodynamics in here, but that's one of the philosophies of biodynamics. And that's what you're looking at in a healthy, whole ecosystem. It provides all of those functions.
So what scale can you look at biodynamic models as small as an acre?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's really hard to put all of the practices into play because animals play a big role, particularly cows. So, but there are aspects of biodynamics that are easily adaptable. So, okay, now we're launching into biodynamics.
Okay.
It's okay. No, I can put it in a nutshell because I do this often. So it's using the biodynamic preps to make compost, or attaining biodynamic compost from other people that have the ability to make good, high quality biodynamic compost, or using biodynamic compost starter from which you can purchase. Planting by calendars. So we plant and harvest, and particularly storage crops or direct seeding. using a biodynamic calendar that really influences the nutrient intensity, the seed germination rate, the storage quality of the food. And then the other main things are field sprays, so horn manure and horn silica, which dynamically improve soil life and plant health.
I should put this
Oh, sure.
right down there. Anywhere in there. That'll be fine. And hopefully this will work. Okay.
I might set this over here
Okay,
just so. Yeah, well, the mic's important. So yeah, I mean, you know, obviously water is really important. So establishing a really effective water cycle on your property, which also goes to play with how your nutrients move through your soils. The water is the conveyor of that. And so to establish a really effective water cycle, techniques that have been used are texturing the landscape. So this has been used throughout history. Various different cultures have their own ways to texture the landscape with very effective results. So there's terraces, there's swales, there's, this is called net and pan, where you do like micro little boomerang catchments, where those catchments, when you have water events, they catch and store nutrients and organic matter and help infiltrate the water, especially on steep slopes like this. So this is a technique that was used in the Lost Plateau that John Liu talks about. And it's particularly effective to establish tree cover in very harsh environments. So you don't have to have contiguous swale systems. You can do these very simply with a shovel, you know, very small things, but in a matrix. So it effectively does the same thing. Again, you know, different styles of terracing. You know, and these beautiful terraces are not using any machines. You know, they've done throughout centuries, no laser levels, no anything involved. It's all using the water itself to find level. And then this catches and stores the nutrients, the water, provides level space for growing and access into those steeper slope areas. And then the last one is a technique called chinampas, and it's used extensively in marshy areas. Primarily, the main historic model has been in Mexico and Amazon basins, and that is essentially these marshlands. They dig canals and pull up the muck and throw the muck up on top. And then they plant fast-growing trees like willows or something along the bank line, and that establishes the bank. And then you have these undulations where you concentrate the water and you concentrate the land. And there's some of the highest productivity comes out of these chinampa systems, because you can have aquaculture, you can have plants up on top, you can have trees that are growing up over and shading the things, and then harvesting, I mean, the nutrients. It's almost like a aquaponics system, because you have the nutrients from the fish coming in, and the plants are being able to take that up through the roots. And then you can go through with canoes and harvest the crops. I've actually done some design work for people that have ponds or marshy areas, and we do just undulating large fingers kind of going back and forth along the pond edge, so that increases edge. And then you can put in water-loving plants like blueberries or you know, watercress and other things like that in those areas, and it's like a self-regulating system once it's established.
Do we have to maintain those?
Yeah, to some degree, but it all depends on, you know, what you're doing and whether you need to access. It could just be marshy goo kind of in the middle. Periodically, maybe you need to go and clean some of that out and put it back up on top. Because what happens is, you know, what's up on the little peninsulas or the islands that kind of sinks over time and then silts out, and then you throw some of this. But you can use some of the willow and coppice that down and throw that down as sticks, and that helps support. The Bullocks do this technique out on their swamp, and they essentially make like floating islands. Like they put a raft of all of these sticks, and they throw the muck up on top of that, and then there's some soil up on top of that, and then they plant plants. And these are kind of like these floating islands of soil that's decomposing and stuff with berry bushes and stuff floating up on top of it. So it's really cool, and it allows you to utilize lands that are otherwise, in conventional farming considered unusable. You can't really do much with the swampland.
Can you spell that?
Chinampa, oh my goodness.
Chinampa?
Chinampa, C-H-N-A-P-A.
Okay, I'm sure it'll get into it.
Chinampa, yeah. It's very interesting technique, very underutilized. A lot because of policy. Like, you got a wetlands, you can't mess with it, It's like,
Right.
but people have gone ahead and done this. It actually enhances the wetlands because it creates the cool deep zones, creates water, and kind of a lot more edge where like water-loving insects can lay their eggs and frogs can hang out. I mean, all these different environments are possible in those areas. Okay, the other really important thing about integrated ecological systems are they're way more productive. Conventional agriculture systems, monocrop systems are only designed, they're not designed for productivity, they're designed for ease of harvest. It's like, how do you go down the row with a tractor and just like harvest the whole field in one day? So this is showing that, you can have 70 hectares and it produces the same amount in an integrated system as 370 hectares of a monocrop system. You have your grazing area, your cropland, your forestry area, but you can do the same thing in way less space because you're stacking functionality in that space. And through putting together a diversified system, you actually create a much more functioning ecosystem. So in this illustration, it shows there's much more animal activity, wildlife, that are encouraged to participate in the farm, nutrient cycling, pest management, all of these functions of wildlife that move through your system are much more active in an integrated system where you have tree cover, domestic animals, field crops, bushes, medicinals, all of that stuff integrated into your system. You're going to have a much wider sense of wildlife coming through. Whereas, the converse, the monocrops, you're tilling, you're killing, you're denuding habitat, insectaries, all of that other stuff. So we really need to start looking at the phases of planning, moving towards these kind of systems, setting up goals, stages of implementation, and most importantly to a lot of farmers that have tract land is maintaining income during that transition. So how can you, okay, I want to move towards an agroforestry system, but I've got a cornfield, and how do I get there over time while I maintain my income because I need to pay for my tractor payment, my land taxes, et cetera.
One question, in the terrain, it has to do with terrain.
Yeah.
Many of these larger farms are pretty much flat.
Somewhat. Yeah, mostly like if you're machine cropping, yes.
Right. So I think of Nebraska, Iowa.
Yeah.
Is there a place in the strategy that includes that handles that for such types of terrain where they don't necessarily have the elevation?
Well, okay, so and we'll get a little bit more into particular strategies, but flatland, you actually have more possibilities. I'll leave it at that for the moment because like steep land, you can only do certain kinds of earthworks without doing too much disturbance. Water only works in one way, like it flows down slope. In flatland, like you can tip the water to go this way or this way with subtle ways that you work with your contouring. So there's a lot more possibilities in flatter land than there is in steeper land. So yeah, we'll look at some of this stuff. So these are just some of the main techniques that are used in regenerative agriculture, which includes agroforestry, integrated farms, holistic management. So holistic grazing for graziers, it's looking at ways of mob stocking your cattle and moving them very quick rotations over a long time before they come back to the same place, so you don't create compaction. You allow the grass to regrow. That in turn sequesters carbon, creates that sponge layer, allows the microbial activity to take hold. All of that through that process, properly managed holistic grazing, you can get a much faster, much healthier pasture land, more carbon sequestration, et cetera. So ground covers are utilized. I'm just kind of touch on some of these strategies. Some of these are being applied in larger scale agricultural production. So the ground covers are the no-till, like crimp rolling. So people say, oh, no-till's catching on. But a lot of the no-till, like what they do is they harvest their crop, and then maybe they'll do a cover crop, but then they'll go through and spray herbicide on everything and then run their seed drill through. So that's just, killing everything in the soil, et cetera. So this no-till crimp rolling with the seed drill, they're going through with a roller, and you can see it there in the top right-hand corner, and it crimp rolls, which kinks all the stems of all the cover crop, and it dies, and you're seed drilling in the same time. So you're going across your field once as opposed to multiple times with your equipment, and you're able to get your crop in. And then as that crimp rolled cover crop decomposes, your seed drilled crop comes up through it, and then you've got like a decomposing mulch going on. And that can be augmented with compost teas that increase the soil microbial activity that help break everything down. So then ponds and swales, hugelkultures. So stop me if you're not familiar with some of these terms. Keyline design and subsoiling, which we'll get into a little bit more. Intercropping, shelter belts, agroforestry crops, which are perennial crops, but there's other perennial crops, berries and cane fruits and such. And then animal integration. So all of these have a lot of benefits, and they have a lot of roadblocks too. And we'll touch on some of the roadblocks, mostly through policy. Sometimes through implementation, there's roadblocks.
So I'm not familiar with hugelkulture.
Okay, hugelkulture is essentially burying wood.
Oh.
So you have like logs and sticks and debris, and you can burn it, you can make a brush pile or whatever. But if you bury this material, typically it's like you scoop out some soil and you make a ditch. Sometimes it's on contour, sometimes it's not. It doesn't really need to be on contour. But you get this material in contact with the soil. So it can be logs, it can be sticks, it can be just brush, blackberry canes, whatever you have. And you bury this, you scoop the soil out, put it to one side, put the material in, and then put that soil back up on top. And what that does is it becomes like a nutrient moisture flywheel. So it absorbs moisture over the wet months, and it gives off that moisture during the dry months. And that essentially, that berm, which it becomes a berm, becomes like a nurse log in an old growth forest. So as that wood decomposes, it releases slow release of nutrients, and then you can plant into that. So it's a technique that's not normally used in large scale agriculture, although it could be, on the edges or in select locations. But in smaller scale, I'm saying smaller scale, like it could be 50 acres is small scale, It could be 5 acres, it could be 1 acre. I've seen hugelkultures that are in like a raised bed garden box. Or a lot of the ones I've made is, 100 feet long. In fact, just an interesting side note, I was looking for graphics to kind of illustrate this, and I found this one online, and I was like, put it on there. I was working up the PowerPoint. I was looking at that center one that says swales. I'm like, God, that looks familiar. And it's like, looking at it again, and that looks really familiar. And I look back through all my photos. That's a project I did for a client. And they pinched my photo off of my website. And that is actually not a swale. That is a hugelkultur. And he had like 3 cottonwood trees that had fallen down and like all this blackberry stuff. And it was just a bunch of slash that was just left like a big mess. And I'm like, I did over 1,500 feet of swales and 2 hugelkulturs and 3 ponds on this site. And Keyline ripped that, and we'll talk more about that. But yeah, so we buried all this stuff, and that's like 150-foot long hugelkultur that's like 10, I mean, you can see a guy reaching up there. It's like 8 or 9 feet tall and probably 15 or 20 feet wide. With like several large trees buried in there. And it just solved so many different issues in this particular site scenario. Okay, I'm gonna dive into a little bit of Keyline design and its effects because it's not really utilized that much in this country, and I think it's a really valuable technique. It's one of the lowest costs per acre way to infiltrate water and build soil. And essentially what it is, the piece of equipment is up there on the right-hand side. It's in this country, it's referred to as a subsoiler, so or a ripper, sometimes called a ripper. So essentially it has like these blades that stick down into the soil, and it cuts a line, and it has a shoe that kind of lifts the soil up a little bit so it fractures the soil, but it doesn't turn the soil. It doesn't do anything to really disturb the soil horizons. But it allows, these rip lines allow water and oxygen and seeds and other things to go down into the soil and become incorporated and increase the root growth and the horizon, the organic matter horizon starts going down. So the ripping is the technique, but then there's a design pattern that's where it's Keyline design. Like you can Keyline rip a field without the design, but if you put the design pattern into it, what it does is, like in the lower left there, you can see the blue cross. That's what's called a key point. It's where the landscape turns from concave to convex, the point of inflection in that landscape. And at that point, like water is coming fairly fast down, but you can see there's contour lines, the brown lines that are going around. But from that point, you start, the steeper slopes you can't rip because you get a piece of equipment on there, it's too steep. You get into the flatter areas, you can start ripping, and you rip off contour. So you're falling off contour from the valley towards the ridge. And what that does is the water that normally had gone down the valley, it now starts fanning out in a wishbone fashion towards the ridge. So you're spreading that water out, and you're decreasing the rapid flow that often causes rutting and erosion in the valley areas, and you're moving it towards the ridge, which are the dry and high areas. So you're dispersing that water more evenly across the landscape, and then you get more even, vigorous growth. And so this is not swales, this is not invasive in the sense of like allowing access across the property. This is a ripped thing that you can drive over, cattle can walk over, whatever. You can crop over the top of it. And you can put it in very quickly with very minimal amount of equipment or soil movement. You had a question? No, okay.
Does it last for a long time?
It does, and we'll touch on that a little bit here. So here on the black and white illustration on the left, it shows like this is a technique that's utilized extensively and originated in Australia, and where they have really brittle soils, really compacted, heavy soils, rocky often, very low in organic matter. And through doing this, and this shows a stage of 4 years, first year is nothing. Second year, you rip as far as you can feasibly rip. Sometimes it's like too hard to get too deep the first year. So you have to loosen that top layer, allow some roots to get established. The next year you come back and rip, and maybe it's not on the same exact line. Third year you come back down, and each year you get root development, you get moisture moving in, you can start putting in different seed, pasture mixes, etc. And once you get those roots established in there, you don't need to do it anymore because the roots start dying off, they create porous places, you end up having more organic matter that starts able to infiltrate more water, and then you're off and running, unless you do some serious compaction, driving heavy equipment or really allowing too many cattle on it for overgrazing in the wrong, like if it's wet and you put too many cattle, you're gonna compact your soils. So it's like really strategic how you manage livestock. But this allows you to do things like the right picture is, if say that whole field was a cornfield or a grain field, you can start putting in systems where you plant tree lines on contour, all this stuff you want to design on contour. You start doing your tree lines, but then you can do your intercrops in between those tree lines. You can still do your corn, your grains, your tractor row crop kind of things to maintain your annual income flow while your trees and agroforestry systems are establishing, right? So it takes a while to get your fruit trees up, your nut trees up, and you're not going to get any return on those for 5, 10, 15, 20 years sometimes. And so you need to be able to do these intercropping, or they call interswale cropping techniques to maintain that cash flow, right? And so you do these in a parallel fashion so that they're wide enough for, if you're doing tractor farming, you're given equipment, it's like 2 passes with your tractor or 4 passes or 8 passes, and that covers that area, right? And then you have the tree crops can be your shelter belts or your windrows or other functions, but they're getting established, right? And then once those get established, you can start extending them. Like maybe you start filling in between that right row, like you're starting to get cropping off of your tree crops, and you start filling in that row, and you start whittling down your annual crops, right? As you start getting cash flow off of your other stuff. So it's a staged implementation over time based on moving towards a more agroforestry system, but a lot of people don't want to do the agroforestry system because it takes too long to get cash flow off of it. You had a question?
I'm just going to clarify. So you could do this, it would be beneficial if you just wanted to maintain the field as a pasture and just improve the soil.
Exactly.
Or you could implement some tree crops between, and then maybe still be running livestock.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's not cropped, it's like a pasture, a long narrow pasture, and you can divide that into cells. So you can do cell grazing down that area. Yeah. Okay, so here's just another illustration of what I was talking about, the Keyline design strategies. The black lines are your actual contour lines. Say they're 5 feet, intervals. Your red lines are your Keyline ripping. So you're following your primary valleys are there and your primary ridges. So you're falling from the valley towards the ridge, right? And then you round the ridge. So you fall out of the valley towards the ridge, and then you climb into the valley. So what I've done this, like you can go out and you laser level and you peg out your field and you survey it and you get a line of pegs that you follow with your tractor, or you can just park your tractor on a level area and put a level on the hood of the tractor, and you can just watch the level. Okay, I'm climbing towards the valley and I'm falling towards the ridge, and I'm climbing towards the valley and I'm falling towards the ridge, and you can just undulate your way around the landscape without having to totally survey the whole landscape. And it's a little bit tweaky to wrap your brain around this stuff, but like when you're out on the landscape and you're doing it, it starts to make sense. And we've done this with a number of properties. I don't have an official Keyline plow, but I use a single shank subsoiler. It takes a little longer, but I really want to get a Keyline plow. And here, let me just show. Here's a couple of different setups. And in Australia, I've seen a number of these setups in various ways. So, and they have these where it's like, I mean, they're doing thousands of acres with this stuff. So they have, a 20 shank plow with, a 370 horse, tractor pulling this thing through. But you can set it up so this one on the left has got little seed boxes, so it's drizzling new cover crop seed or pasture mix seed in there, and it's got compost tea. So it's inoculating those rip lines at the same time as you're going down through. And it's got this cutlers, which kind of cut the sod. It gives a little bit less disturbance with the ripper as you're going through it. And this other one has like a roller, because when you do rip it, it kind of flips that sod up even with the cutler. And so that roller kind of pushes that sod back down, so it's not really too big of an encumbrance, like somebody's not going to trip on it, but it still gives that incision into the earth so that water and air and other roots and seeds can get established. There was one other thing I was going to say about that. Oh, yes.
Are those, like that one on the top left was kind of custom made, or is there is that kind of rigged together?
Well, so the really important part is this. Let me just back up. You can see on here better. So that those shanks that come down, it's like the shank and the shoe, right? And the shoe is kind of a consumable part, like eventually that gets worn down. But the shank is really hardened steel, and the shoe is removable. You can put different types of shoes on. So, and that is clamped on to what's known as a toolbar. So you can buy just the shanks, and you can fashion your own toolbar, and you can make your own spacing, and you put all this stuff together however you want, really. Or you can buy the whole shebang. But all of this, these are called yeoman's plows, developed by PA Yeoman originally in Australia. And to ship a whole plow over from Australia is quite expensive. So most people in this country, they just buy the shank and the shoe bit and then hook it on their own toolbar and arrange it as they see fit. So that's a really good question. Where I'm going with this is something that you don't have to use every year, every season, whatever. It's like once you get it established. So I am looking in our area to work with the conservation district to buy one of these that is available for people to use, because this is a conservation measure that keep erosion from going off-site, keep water retention on properties, sequester carbon. I mean, it does all the stuff that the conservation districts mandate. And to get a decent setup, you're looking at $8,000 to $10,000, which is a little bit steep for like a Joe Blow little farmer person. But if you have this in the community and you can rent it, and typically the best time to do this is in the spring, as soon as you can get on the land. So as you have the benefit of frost heave that kind of like loosens the soil up, but you don't have a lot of grass growth yet. If you have too much grass growth, then kind of gets tangled up and whatever. And if you wait too late in the year, the ground's too hard, so forth. So I am working with our conservation district on doing this, and we're trying to show some demonstration plots, and I'm going to be giving a presentation like this to their group, and they get grant money and stuff to do this kind of thing. So
which conservation district are you?
Whatcom County. Yeah. But like every conservation district should have one of these, and it's like pennies per acre to do this versus like swaling your whole property. And this is not invasive like a swale is going to be invasive. It's going to interrupt your access and your cattle movement and whatever. So definitely can retain a lot more water over the large acreage with this technique.
So in a way you see this as an alternative to swaling in some instances?
Yes,
Like,
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, swales are great, don't get me wrong. In the right context, they really work, and I'll show some areas where they're really working.
This is cool.
Yeah, so here's another example of establishment of the contour planting. So, you know, they might have tilled the tree line initially and then put a ground cover and then went through like a larger acreage with a tree planter, you know, and somebody's sitting there and just stuffing trees in as you're cruising along, and you can put in thousands of trees, you know, a day with that method, or you get it cruise and you just like stitch them in, and then all of that gets like mulched down. It's a cover crop to establish those lines, and then you can intercrop. You can hay it, you can graze it, you can run a crop through it, but it's moving towards that agroforestry system where it's less tillage. Okay, this is just, I threw this in here, showing the carbon increase over time through using some of these techniques. And let you digest that a little bit. I'm not going to really talk, but I mean, it's self-evident. It's like if you increase root depth, moisture holding capacity, biology in the soil, you're just going to be increasing the sponginess and the carbon holding capacity of that soil.
13 inches of rainfall?
Yeah.
That, like there was a major storm or something?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's held it all.
Held
just
it all.
like sucked it in.
That's incredible. That's,
Yeah.
That's a great demonstration.
So, and it's not just like holding the water, it's stopping erosion.
Yeah.
You know, and it's stopping leachates from going everywhere. So, a very efficient tool that's like not utilized here. So this is kind of just looking at a whole landscape and how you can utilize different aspects of the landscape for different types of regenerative farming. So, you know, the steeper slopes you want to put into more treed cover, the timber trees, woodlot, mushroom banks, all of these kind of things, but you want to stabilize those tree slopes and put them into permanent forest systems. The lower slopes, so you can start doing some animal integration. You know, the flatter slopes is definitely where you would put more of your, like your main crop garden, maybe some tractor farming type things. You know, and just utilizing these zones that permaculture spells out so well, like appropriate placement with your zones and your sectors in the landscape. Okay, so I'm just bounce off. I just brainstormed a whole bunch of just possible crops. So people are like, so, like, how do you make a living doing all of this stuff? And there's so many crops that you can put into your system that are definitely underutilized, or you're relying on them from a long ways away. So you're having shipping costs and all of this. So, you know, I'll just let you look at those. I'm not going to read through things, but I mean, some of them are just really broad topics. Agroforestry and forest products. I mean, that can be just like huge, right? You know, different kinds of critters you can put in there. Nursery plants can totally be in that mix. Whole nursery rows of things. The obvious things, you know, are fruits and nuts and berries and all of those. But again, this is all moving towards a perennial, ideally agroforestry or agroforestry edge type cropping. There's bees can be in here, worm farming can be in here, compost making can be in here. All of these things, and they're all not mutually exclusive. They all feed into one another. Like your composting operation helps your farm, and it deals with the manure from your animals. And you know, this is the holistic, looking at the farm as one organism, a kind of mindset where we need to start going. Okay, and then there's, I mean, that is a spin-off on all these other value-added products you can do, you know, wood shops and weddings and, you know, on and on and on, seed suppliers, and I mean, I'm just popcorning some of these out, but there's tons of stuff. All these value-added products and services. I mean, we do on our farm, we do tours, I do design consults, I have nursery plants, I do seed saving, you know, we do animals, all of this stuff is all possible on a very small or large scale. And we'll say a little bit about scale. I mean, we need to move away from the big farm system. We need to get smaller, more integrated farms with more people on the land doing things. And a lot of smallholders, even like medium-sized landholders, 50 to 100 acres, I'm calling medium for my mindset. Like, they can't farm all that themselves unless they're doing row crop tractor farming. And so you can organize other people to come. Hey, will you run some pigs, and will you take care of some bees, and will you, do the mushrooms? And so you can dovetail with other people that want to do enterprises on your land that's going to augment your whole production system, right? So we need to get away from, this is my land, I'm going to do the thing, and it's like, and then most of the land doesn't get really fully utilized. So, okay. So I'm going to dive into a few case studies. These are just some broad ones that were like, wow, that's a good graphic. I'll show that one. And then the rest are going to be some of the things that I've done with our property. So this is Spiral Ridge Permaculture Farm in Tennessee. This shows what can be done in 10 years, right? This is a totally logged off, denuded ridgeland property, and he's moved it totally into a agroforestry system, and he runs pigs, chickens, turkeys. He has bees. I mean, just all kinds of stacked in functions. He runs workshops, training centers, and a whole CSA. I mean, all kinds of things are all in there. And it looks beautiful now, so this is what we need to start looking at. And as a young farmer and somebody that really wants to look at this, try and find the most denuded, nastiest, cheap land you can find, and you can fix it and go these directions with it, because I mean, those are the lands that are accessible, but the tool set is out there to do this. In a very short time you can turn things around.
How many acres is this?
I think it's like 30. I'm not exactly sure. That's, if you want more, it's spiraledgepermaculture.com on them. The other one is a classic example. This is Mark Shepard's farm in in Wisconsin. This was a 100-acre cornfield that over the last 20 years, he's moved it towards this whole agroforestry system where he has chestnuts, walnuts, filberts, fruit trees, berries, herbs, veggies, all put on contour. And he runs cattle, pigs, turkeys, chickens, the whole thing. He has a nut oil press. He does annual row crops in between the tree shelter belts, where he does peppers, asparagus, veg things. He's formed cooperatives with other farmers to do cidery and nut products, so nut butters, nut oils, nut flour. And so these are all enterprises that if enough of us get going, we can put together cooperatives that have the right processing equipment and stuff to do this. Because in a small scale, it's kind of cost prohibitive to buy your own oil press and your own seed cleaners and your own, but you band together and you can market it under one label, and then you have a lot more clout and resilience in that. Yeah.
So that's like doing the model where you might own land or be able to steward land, and then you find the other people to create the business models to rent the land.
Exactly.
From you, you could be part of the ownership on either side or management team.
Yep, right. Exactly.
And then finding those specific crops that work with the region or that people are doing and organizing that to use your space better to create more or to draw more income to the community.
Definitely. Yeah. One of the biggest challenges for small farms and people that want to do this stuff is marketing. So it's like, oh, I've got extra, peas or lettuce or apples or whatever, but it's not enough really to sell to the co-op. It's not really enough to wholesale. So how do you find your market? But if you have some aggregator that pulls together, you don't have enough, but they've got peas and they've got peas and they've got peas, and you put it together, all of a sudden you've got enough to go out and market, or the aggregator person could run the CSA and they box stuff up and they do the distribution. So there's a lot of kind of different models that need to start like percolating up that encourage people to go to these diversified routes. A lot of the reason people go to a monocrop thing is because then they'll have enough of one thing that they can market.
Nice thing about this is, like this farm here, it becomes a destination unto itself.
Exactly.
Which is really
Exactly.
nice.
And I just have a question. I've been trying to see if there's any container within our various organizations for making like a template or a place to put in parts of our models based on our site conditions to help share what works in different areas. Like, is anybody doing that? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But wouldn't that be
Yeah,
awesome?
yeah.
Because then what works in different
Yeah.
areas, you just share with everybody.
Yeah.
Talk to the guy that is developing the web networking.
Yeah, like a wiki kind of model.
He's looking for input
Yeah,
and
like
ideas.
Northwest Permaculture Convergence, like the group said that we could like lobby that if no one else is.
Yeah.
I thought there might be somebody already doing it.
Yeah,
and
well,
they
it's
wanna
good
try
to not reinvent
divert
the
from
wheel.
that. Yeah, but nobody knows of anybody
Yeah.
with a container for models.
No,
Okay,
No.
it's really important.
Yeah.
And we can just explore.
I mean,
these areas.
there's so many like income enterprise opportunities in these systems. Like somebody that doesn't have land, they can aggregate all this food from all these people that are doing things.
Or have a
People that
processing
don't have land, or running the processing facility, or packaging seeds for market, or all these different things. So much opportunity. Okay, so now I'm going to dive into kind of our farm's experience and context a little bit, kind of see how that transition unfolds. So here's our context. This gravel pit, this big open pit mine, is our backdoor neighbor, right? So the land dotted there, that's our land that we've been working with, but we're right next to this huge sore on the earth that I'm looking forward to the transformation. It's supposed to be remediated into Lake Laurel, which will, in the year 2020, believe it or not. I don't think it's going to happen, but.
How recent is this picture?
This is maybe, I don't know, not that many years ago, maybe a couple. It's a Google Earth thing, but we'll look at some of that. So here's a time lapse. You can Google Earth, you can go way back. So I went and kind of overlaid some of these photos. This is shortly after we got it. And it's not the whole property. I'm just kind of looking at our main area and the houses and stuff around there. So the field, this is about 13 altogether. So this is in the beginnings. We started putting stuff on contour a little bit, and I'll get into this a little more. This is just kind of giving an overview. A little bit more integration, a little bit more tree cover. A few more ponds, a few more water retention areas. Some of these images are a little blurry, but this one showed a little bit more of the water bodies that were, because it was the wet season. All these water bodies do dry up in the summer at this point, like that one's dry. But this is current, where we're looking at now. So a lot more tree cover. And a lot more integration and connection of systems. Come on, go to the next one. Okay, this is what it looked like in around 1960. This was a picture that came with the house. So there hardly any trees, a lot of bare ground. The whole backfield was all monocrop corn. After this, when we got it, it had been a denuded grazed pasture. So like they had grazed some beef cattle on it, on and off, but it was pretty thistly, thorny, scrub kind of stuff in there. Very compacted soils. So it came with some buildings, some fence work, a little bit of a windbreak that the previous folks had planted. On the lower left corner there, you can see there's the young trees they planted, so they did have a foresight we get a lot of serious northeast winds coming through there, so they did plant some of those, that windbreak, which are now like mature trees that I'm having to plant more stuff into to come up in the understory. So I did compacted pasture, the infrastructure basic, and a small garden space. So the original garden space is, I'm tethered here a little bit, so I don't have a pointer, but it is kind of like right here. Small, and it was, they tilled it, 2 or 3 times a year religiously, so it was the hardest ground for me to fix. Whereas like some of the pasture I turned into annual beds, and that responded immediately, like within 1 year. It was really good soil and deep and loose, whereas the main garden was not. So around 2006, we really started diversifying. It took us a while because both my wife and I, we had our own businesses. I'm a glass artist, she was a jewelry designer, wholesaler. So we mainly were doing that and raising kids for the first little bit. And then we realized we need to start doing more of our own food for our family. So it really came out of a homestead farm kind of mentality. So we started learning more about permaculture and looking at how we start integrating some of these systems in a more diverse way. So diversifying with some critters, some ducks and chickens, making more compost, integration of systems, and looking at some and installing the first swales and pond systems. There's a lot of water that flows through this area. The ground was very compacted. It was fairly low in organic content, so a lot of the water just sheeted off. And we actually had some of our cabins the first several years, they would flood in the wintertime, like literally inches of water in these cabins. And so immediately, like, the problem is the solution, right? We got a lot of water, we got to figure out to put it in the right place and hold it on site and so forth. So this was the first obvious swale location. On the left there, you can see some of the first like crop area we started. But this was like the wettest area of ground all year long. So that was my key first spot I started with. And the top right is like kind of a couple of years later. And then on the bottom is what it kind of looks like now. So that swale mound is truly a tree growing system. It's pumping out the food right now a few years later. We extended on to that. So all of these systems, this is like beginning trial and error. So in the beginning, you don't want to do things too fast. You want to do that slow and steady incremental steps. Because if you do things too fast, throw a lot of money, your time, energy at it, you can make big mistakes that you have to undo. So that's one thing I really stress. I do a lot of design consults now, and I can walk onto a property and I'm like, I have a much better sense of how to design and how to put it into practice, but I always advise do this in incremental steps. Like put in this, here's the obvious first low-hanging fruit feature you should put in, see how that goes for a year. If there's more water than you think that goes through that system, you can extend it, or you might modify your plan a little bit. But just incremental steps is really key. So we added this hugelkultur to the one end. So there you see, dug into the soil, put a bunch of trees, usually scrub trees, willows, cottonwoods, things you wouldn't want to burn or mill or use for firewood or anything. And then that gets buried. And that actually is on one end of that lowest swale. And it's been the trees that I planted in that 2 years after I built it are larger than the trees I planted originally on the other end of it. So it does have a lot of work. This is, we get a lot of students from Huxley Environmental College through, and so this was a picture we put together. This is another hugelkultur, but that is like 3 months later from the top to the bottom left. Wow. Yeah.
How have you engaged the college students on your farm? Do you just like call the college and say,
We have an ongoing working relationship with a couple of the professors in the agroecology department at Huxley. And they're, you know, we've been working with them for 10 years or so. And
is it like you invite them to a project?
she calls me up like, can I bring my class out?
So like, so just to facilitate those relationships with people and just like at the college.
Yeah.
Like,
I would
talk to the educators.
Yeah, invite them to your place. Invite, you know, hey, you know, we're doing something you might be interested in. Would you want to come out and tour around? And I'd be interested in hosting some classes. And most of these classes are not necessarily work parties like this. Most of them are like walk and talk, tour, kind of like drum in some of these concepts. People have seen them in books or watched a YouTube or something, but they haven't seen them in actual life, in functionality. And so, you know, for them to come out is very valuable. In fact, I get students email me that have been years ago and they was like, the visit to your farm was the most influential thing in my whole education. You know, it totally changed their life. And so it's very important. I strongly encourage you to make those connections. So, and then on the right bottom is kind of what it showed. I took this photo the other day. So the water is already subsiding. We've had way less moisture this spring than most years, but like the tree system is already up and going. They're very well established. They're off and running. I have no concern over that, and I'm already getting production out of that.
Can I just ask a question about that agriculture? I'm just trying to understand exactly. Is that
so
kind of a swale as well?
It's a swale hugelculture, and I know there's issues with doing a hugel swale. So for those that are not familiar, hugelcultures don't necessarily have to be on contour. You can put them on contour on shallow sloping ground. If you put them on contour on steeper sloping ground, what can happen is what happens when wood goes in water, it floats. And so if you got too much water backed up behind it and a steep enough slope, that wood can float up and it can blow out your whole swale system. And you have kind of a catastrophic failure there. So you want to have, like all of my swale systems have a spillway. So they all, you know, I moderate exactly how much water that gets held in those systems. And then, you know, oftentimes I have them subtly off contour for two reasons. One, to kind of, I decide which side I want the water to go out. But also it provides frost drainage. So the low areas is where the cool air will settle. And if you pile up that cool air, pretty soon you have this lake of cool air, and that's like a frost pocket. So if you have an exit for that cool air to move, you can direct how the cool air moves through your property, and you can choose where your microclimates can start being, right? Okay, we'll move on. This is extension of an upper swale. I'll get to that. This is one of our more productive swales, and this is the top is a planting into it that I did probably 6 years ago. And then with water and a cover crop probably a year later, so the trees are still pretty small there. Oh, okay, now there's a little history. So as things evolve, like you experiment with things, you play with things, we added more elements and infrastructure, movable animal systems, dug a few more ponds, goats we had, started putting more stuff on contour beds, more animal movement and connection between the elements. Again, adding to infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, so initially we did a lot of movable fencing because we weren't sure where some permanent fencing was going to go. And I strongly recommend that. You know, a lot of people like, oh, we're just going to paddock this off. And you do woven wire and fence posts and all this stuff. And it's a lot of work. And then 2 years later, it's like, oh, I didn't really want to do all the goats and paddocks and all this stuff. And you have to rip it all out. So if you do movable fencing for a little bit and then you set like, oh, I keep setting up my fence like right here, It's like, then that's maybe a good spot to put a permanent fence line in. And with permanent fencing, that's like your infrastructure. You can also run electric hot wire right along that you can clip onto any point along there, and then you can do electromesh fence out around that to do poultry or other things in a temporary fashion. You can also run a water line along that. So it all of a sudden becomes an access point for all these other functions. Then that fence also becomes, now it's becoming, and I don't think I have photos of it, a trellis for grapes and an area for a hedgerow and a da-da-da-da-da. You know, all these things start stacking up on there. Then we started looking at more pasture management. So you can see like there's 3 kind of zones in that upper pasture. That very top was grazed first, that middle swath was second, and then that lower section is going to be third. So we only have 2 to I think 4 cows. This is the most we've had at any one time. We have 1 family dairy cow and then usually a calf or 2 at any given time. And so it's really tricky to do the holistic grazing thing because there's like not enough mouths to eat the grass when it's growing really fast, and then the grass kind of gets out of control and goes to seed, and then you got to cut it somehow to refresh it. So it's a little tricky. I mean, we've tried it, but we can't do mob stock grazing with 4 cows. Unless you do very, very small cells, you know, and just like move them every other day or every day, you know. So we're trying, but at this point, I think I did Keyline rip that back pasture. And at that point, it really changed the whole dynamic in that pasture, because there's 2 kind of valleys that water seeps down, and it just pulled it back to the ridge. The ridge is now green all year long. You know, it's really, whoa, that was dynamic improvement. And so I've done it for several other clients now, and they can't believe the effect it's had as well. Yeah, more compost, started getting into biodynamics, all kinds of different things. So our yields started increasing, our you know, crop diversity started getting more intensive. We started doing more appropriate technology. So all of these things start dovetailing together, you know, as the system evolves. So, you know, here's, we don't till, but I do use a broad fork. So I started, and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. So I held a broad fork making class, and we made a bunch of broad forks. And since I've made, you know, probably 75 broad forks for people. And we have several on our farm of different sizes. Gray water systems. We did hot water composting, outdoor showers for workshops and stuff. We have a solar food dehydrator. We don't mow or do anything. I use all scythes to cut all our forage, paths, mowing, haying. Everything is done with the scythe, which I totally love and is one of the coolest appropriate tech tools out there. Doing things like living willow benches and starting experimenting with growing things other than food and produce, you know, fiber products. So right now we have probably 35 different willows for basketry making and furniture making and all that stuff. So there's that are also animal feed and windbreaks and, you know, exactly, that's what I'm saying. That's the product. You can make some of the best artist charcoals out of willow. So there's a lot of really cool value-added enterprises that could happen off of these things. So here's 2009. It's probably a little hard to see, but I figured out how to get, like, you can go on GIS or other things and get contour lines, but usually they're like 15 or 20 foot intervals, and there was like 2 lines going across our property. You know, that didn't really do much. So it's like, how do you get, aside from going out there with a laser level and pegging everything, how do you get, so I learned how to get like closer contour lines. So this was 1 foot contour lines. Oh my God, that was a game changer. So now I can start looking at how to really dial this in. And granted, the map is not the territory. So when you go out there and do it, it may not be exactly like this, but this gives you a really good starting place to look at where your low-hanging fruit are to put your main lines.
Where did you find it?
Well, I generated it. So with Google Earth and SketchUp, you can interface it. You can download a Google Earth terrain map, and then with SketchUp, you can make cross sections through that, and you do intersect, and it draws lines on it. You can do it 6 inches. You can do it 1 inch. You can do it 10 feet. You know, you can do it any scale you want, and draw these contour lines. And like I said, it's not exact, but it's close. But this has allowed me to develop, here's kind of more highlighting our water systems on the farm. So at this point, 2012, most of our beds are on contour. Our biomass is greatly increasing. We have a lot of animal integration. Systems are really starting to connect together. And this is, things really start changing when your systems connect. That means water systems, nutrient flows, animal systems, shelter belts, access corridors, all of these things are connectivity systems. And when that starts happening, everything starts getting easier, just starts flowing. And so this is like the axiom in permaculture is designed from pattern to detail, right? Like you don't go, where do I put the apple tree? You go like, where's my contour lines? Where's my access? Where's my structures? And then everything else kind of fits into place after that. So the connectivity. Then getting a little bit more dialed on our access and infrastructures, ripping the pasture, and then our water systems evolved. So right now we have 5 ponds. The only one that's year-round is that very top right corner one. And that one is amazing. There's probably a spring up there. And on my list to do next is increase the size of that pond. Because once I get that, like year-round, boom, it's game over. Like I've got everything covered. I can irrigate everything. I can work it all the way down through the 5 ponds and 13 swales to the very bottom pond close to the front of the property. And then I can solar pump it back up. You know? And then it's like you're set. Everything else is going. As of right now, like, so there's the 2 major, okay, I'm gonna have to walk again. The 2 major swales, our main like annual areas are right here. This is like our main salad garden. And then there's a couple of other little salad gardens there. This little area and this little area. But our largest area is in here, right? In here, I've put these 2 swale lines. And this is all intercrop area here and intercrop area here. And then this was the first swale I put in. And then we have our cropping area here. So these swales, these 3 swale, well, this I kind of consider connected. There's an access through here, so this is piped between there, so I can get across. But so I consider those 3, that sub-irrigates everything. So the last 3 years have been pretty severe drought during the summer, like 3 months of no rain, right? I don't irrigate anything. It's all sub-irrigated because all that water is held in the soil. These fill up numerous times through the rainy season, and all of that soaks in. And it flows downslope, and it gets held in our soils, in our organic matter. And then these have become my major new tree growing systems. This is kind of an old orchard down here, which I've put some new stuff, but I've really focused a lot of my newer things in this upper section and along fence lines and this edge. And yeah, it's like totally changed everything. One other little note. So this green line, this is a valley. And this line here is kind of a valley, right? So there's a ridge that goes through here. So the water used to just come down through here and down and off site. I put in this intercepting pond right up here at this highest point in the valley that wasn't in the pasture. And so this area doesn't have a lot of catchment because it's up on the ridge line. But this does have a lot of catchment. It catches from all up here and focuses it down here. So I caught that, and then when this fills up, it backfloods out this swale. So I'm taking that water from the valley towards the ridge. And then this when it subsides, it can't flow back into the pond. It has a little check kind of dam right there. So it flows in, fills up about 1.5 feet in that whole swale line. And then as the water soaks in a little bit, it drops below that dam. And all of this water, this 1.5 feet of water in the swale line, can't go back into the pond. So all of that soaks in, and that does that numerous times through the winter. So you're just trying to slow and soak and spread that water as much as possible to rehydrate your soils. People come and they go, you don't irrigate? You're growing lettuce and all this stuff up there? I'm like, I don't irrigate. Like, not in the conventional sense that irrigation term is used. We will water to get seeds germinated. We will water if we transplant something until they get root establishment. But after that, boom, they're on their own. I want to train my plants that the water is in the soil, not at the surface. And so that's how you get nutrient-dense food, is because the roots go down to seek that water. That's where they find the minerals, right? So, yeah, this has been an evolution to hold all this water, but all of this is illegal. You know? All of this is illegal.
Because you don't have a water right.
No, it's not that. It's not that I don't have a water right. It's that I'm creating wetlands. I'm disturbing, potential other wetlands. I'm creating. In fact, we had just recently an issue. We built a house. Just built a new house over here. But I'd already built this pond. That swale wasn't in yet. But this was one of the first ponds that I built. And because I built that pond, this is now considered a wetland. And that wetland has to have a buffer. And this, so we had to go through all this hoop jumping to do that. And if you're starting with, and this is considered a wetland up there, and this is considered a wetland up here, but I augmented them. I made it bigger, and I attached a swale, and I did this and that. So all of that stuff is technically illegal. But life enhancing. This is habitat enhancing. This is life enhancing. This has made my whole transition to agroforestry and all these other crops super simple, because all of a sudden there's life in the soil, and there's water, and there's all these things that move things forward. Okay, I did a calculation. So out of all these systems, when everything's full, I'm storing 158,000 gallons of water on site, right? So some of the questions that come up when I talk about this kind of thing is what do you do about mosquitoes? Well, in the summer, most of the stuff goes dry, and all these swales become level walking paths, and all the swale mounds are like giant raised beds. So as long as you have the access stuff dialed in, plus if there is mosquito larvae, I'm also attracting frogs and swallows and damselflies and all this other habitat that create the checks and balances necessary, right?
There an easy way to get rid of goldfish in the pond outdoor?
To what?
Get rid of goldfish.
To put in?
Get rid of them.
Oh, get rid of them? Invite the herons. We tried to put in goldfish, and the birds just came and got them all. Yeah, herons are really good. Raccoons, herons, eagles, all those will come and get them. Okay, now these are just some other properties. Just you kind of get the framework, what you're trying to work with. These are some other properties I designed, most of the designs I do are not really detail oriented. They're mainframe designs. So mainframe means water access structures, integration for what the clients are trying to achieve, whether it's animal systems or crop growing systems or agroforestry systems, so forth. So this is a 28 acres. It was an old horse property, very compacted kind of place. So south-facing slope on this lower right side, and then kind of a big level top side with an existing pond where we did chinampas, so all those finger peninsulas. Those are all blueberry growing chinampas. He wanted to do a U-pick blueberry thing and run poultry, and then they had llamas and cattle that they wanted to do on this lower slope. So by using contours and laying out these swale lines, it naturally divides that huge paddock into 3 compartments where you can easily rotate your livestock through those. Created water connectivity through the whole place. We did add a couple of ponds. This is the one where I did that picture of the one large hugelkultur. This is on there right next to the barn coming down that side. So it's able to capture all the water coming all the way around. It still makes it into the pond, but he had problems with the pasture itself being really wet and not being able to run livestock on it or being able to hay it properly because he just bogged down in some of the boggy areas. So the water actually can enter into the pond through these 2 access points on the side that are also paths. So when you put in these swaled systems, all of a sudden you get control over which way the water you want it to go. You catch it at the top and you go, do we want it over here or over here? We can have it come out the middle. Before it was just kind of sheeting willy-nilly down through the pasture and everything was kind of just gooey. Now you have control and you can move it, but it's still soaking in and sub-irrigating without it being totally gooey. Okay, here's another property. This is a smaller acreage. This was originally like a 50-acre piece. They divided up into these 6 to 8 acre McMansion-y kind of properties. Everybody manicures their lawn to the nth degree and sprays their trees and roundups their edge of their driveway and stuff. And he bought it because he's has an autoimmune deficiency, is very hypersensitive to chemicals, and he didn't realize all this stuff. And so one of the big design problems for this, well, A, he wanted to grow a lot of his own food, but B, he was at the bottom of the watershed and all this toxic gick was running on site. And so we designed the swales. Right, the top of the property is at the bottom here, which is also south, which is a little bit of a challenge, but whoops, what happened? Poof, right through here. Cozy up. There's front row seats. So let's see, I backed up. So we installed these swale systems to really keep that toxic water from going everywhere and to be able to direct it through a rebed filtration system. And then that went through a biochar filtration system, and then we installed mushroom microremediation systems. And that we've had that water tested. It's actually absolutely clean coming through there. And then they do spray, so we also installed bamboo screening at the property edge, so any of that overspray would hopefully be caught mostly by the bamboo screening.
I'm really sorry, we gotta go.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. Do you
Sure.
ever up the Comox Valleyway, Vancouver Island?
I have been. I don't usually get away too often,
Exactly
but
through the thing, unless you have a card or something.
I do. I totally have a card, and then there's also a little brochure right there.
Okay, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. There's a brochure. Those are some of we do different events and workshops. In fact, we're doing one on reading the landscape for this kind of design later this year. So it's there and on our website.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck,
Yeah,
everybody, with
thanks.
your work.
So anyway, these kind of techniques are really, really effective for dealing with these kind of problems. And then he's been able to plant these berms that have provided, this was maybe 5 years ago we did that install. They're now producing.
He's never gardened before or farmed or done anything, and he's like really feeling positive, like in, you know.
What's a reed bed? I don't know.
A reed bed is like the water goes through a gravel matrix. So in all the
Filtration.
yeah, the surface area of the gravel, there's bacteria in there that starts breaking things down, and you plant things like cattails and rushes. And
Good for that.
yeah, I'm not sure how well it does in full standing water. I mean, it might be good on the side. But there's a lot of plants that will do good, and the root hairs like filter that water. They filter the big macro particles out and bioaccumulate those essentially. And then it went through a biochar filter system, which I don't think I was going to put in all kinds of slides of that because it's really cool, but I didn't. And then the final thing was through these mushroom, like sheet mulch mushroom beds that did the final filtration. This was another area. This is like 30 acres. And she did primarily cattle in the back area, but it was like really wet in certain areas all over the place and kind of squishy. So we concentrated the water, concentrated the land. Keyline ripped her pastures, and she had really heavy clay soil. So they would, like all the water would sheet off when it came, and then it was like brown all summer long. Now she has green pastures all year long because of the water catchment and the keyline ripping. And we did some test holes and dug. That clay is starting to break up because of the root integration, and it's starting to become more organic rich, which will allow more moisture to be absorbed. This was another 15-acre piece. This is kind of low bottom area. He wanted to keep that as he has an agricultural status, and he didn't really want to do tons along that line, so he could just hay this and keep his agricultural status. And then this is kind of a steep south-facing slope where he wanted to concentrate he wanted to go agroforestry and some small animals, and get this, he wants to, and shh, don't tell anyone. He wants to grow snail caviar. So he wanted snail greenhouse thing. So this is really, he says snail caviar. It's like slug eggs, right? You know, a little BB thing, you know. But he says it's more valuable than gold. Like you can sell an ounce of this stuff for like, you know.
It with your marketer.
Yeah. And you could ship it all over the world. Like it's like a little tin of this stuff. Like, and so he wants snail fodder areas and snail greenhouses that are like, I had to research all this. What the hell is that? You know, it's like there's boxes with boards and you lift them up and the snails are all in there. And then you harvest these egg clusters and wash them and package them and ship them off. But he's like, it's more valuable than gold. So he wanted this water system. And he had a lot of water and he had a road up at the top. So we could do road catchment. Above that, he didn't really have a whole lot of catchment. It was just really the road surface. But we calculated how much water, and there were several culverts coming through. So again, road catchment is a good place, but you're getting some toxins and stuff through that. So we ran it through a reed bed filter, a biofilter into a settling pond. And then we reticulated that back and forth across this sloping area to hold it and have it touch as many elements as possible while maintaining access along those same routes. Okay, conclusions and takeaways. What do we got? The inertia, the current USDA mindset is really problematic. You know, we need to take away that. Land policy and zoning is often really hard to navigate. Like I was saying with the water, digging, swales and ponds and stuff like that. The policymakers don't like that so much. Regulations regarding wetlands, which are actually the most productive areas, are where your water and land meet, and you have mingling of species.
Picture that slide.
Yeah. Farm subsidies and guidelines, like what people get subsidized for. And getting people out to work on more small diversified farms. You know, the people, it's like more hands out there doing a variety of things like I was talking about. You know, changing that paradigm of people thinking, I gotta grow one crop because I can't. No, you can do multiple things if you get multiple people involved and working with other people that are doing the same thing. And then access to land for people that want to do it is like really a big roadblock, and it's one that's been talked about a lot. And then what would really help this transition is more farms documenting this kind of work, like really good documentation. I can't stress that enough. I wish I had taken better before photos, because now I want to compare like what this looked like from exactly this spot, you know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So documenting it both in just photos, but also videos and somebody putting together like a whole, like this, but more elaborate presentation. Proven models, which go to the documentation. Like people are not going to transition to this thing unless they see it's working somewhere else. So you got to have proven models that work towards this. Policies that encourage that transition. So there is some USDA agroforestry incentives. It's starting to be recognized a little bit more, but a lot of these agroforestry, it's like coppice crops or timber crops. I mean, that's what people think of as agroforestry, not like fruit and nut and bee forage and mushrooms and, you know, all these other things that you can stack in there, berry crops. There's so many other things that you can put into that agroforestry context. And it moves it towards, people don't realize, oh, you can't get as much a yield. Maybe you can't get like the dollar number yield per acre, but your inputs are way less. So actually your net gain is better, you know? And once, yeah, you have to have a lot of thought and planning, putting it into practice. And then initial installation does take some work, but after that, it just gets better and better and better after time. So incentives, so, you know, some kind of subsidies that help people move towards these longer range goals, agroforestry and regenerative farming. One thing I would put on here is also access for the community to a Keyline plow. You know, that I think is something I'm really going to work on this year. Again, and then again, access to land for young farmers, looking for opportunities for that to happen. So pairing with people that have monetary resources or land they're not using, or setting up land trusts, some way that people, young farmers, there is access to land for young farmers, but they don't feel a personal sense of ownership of that land a lot of times. And so they don't want to do some of these more permanent installation, time, money, investment tactics.
I have a,
yeah.
I just want to say here in Port Townsend, Jefferson County, there's an investing group that takes proposals from people. There's no central authority that actually says this particular person gets this money. It's just a clearinghouse sort of place, and the relationship is between the person who wants the money and the investor.
Right.
But investors often take interest in products, and it's over time they establish a relationship. I just think that's
see if it'll come back to life.
Model.
I don't know if it's going to go or not. I think the bulb burned out. I just put this together just recently, but I would consider making it available. Put it up on our website or something. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, ta-ding! Must have just overheated or something. Yeah. Okay, where are we at? Oh, there it is. So there's the end. There's my favorite photo of the farm. But yeah, I'm really keen on. I mean, that's what we are. We're Inspiration Farm. We're hoping to inspire people to move in this direction. We're I mean, we're not super profit driven. I mean, yes, we need to make an income for it, but we're not like a market farm where we don't have tons of overhead. So we do a lot of experimentation. We're doing rice trials. Have for the last.
Wild rice?
Yeah. It's. I mean, they're seasonally wet, so it's a little bit tricky. But we're doing highland, dryland rice. So we do just a lot of experimentation with things because like somebody's got to do it. And then we share it, and we do like a lot of education things, workshops, field trips for the environmental college and other things like that. And we really hope, this catches on because it's the way forward, the integration of systems, and it provides so many ecological services. That's one thing when people go, do you get, what's your monetary return on your investment? And it's like, people don't tabulate in the ecological services of like, we're filtering water, creating habitat, building soil, creating species diversity. Like I'm seeing birds I've never seen before in 20 years. I'm seeing, we have more varieties of frogs and amphibians than I've ever seen before. We have turtles, I've never seen turtles. Where did they come from,
like how much do you have to pay to get no mosquitoes?
Yeah.
There's a lot of chemicals.
Yeah.
I think that's also part of a social transition.
Yeah.
Where we tend to make the financial return prime.
Yeah.
And everything else is subservient to that. And there are greater benefits that we ignore than how much profit you're making.
Yeah.
And so that's a part of the shift as well.
Yeah, and I mean, when I talk to students and stuff, I go like, we don't buy a lot of our food, so that's a decreased income. We don't have a lot of health issues because we eat good food, so that's a decreased income. I mean, a decreased expense. So, how does that all, tabulate into it? It's like really important stuff that like people just ignore when they look at like the bottom line, the dollars and cents and stuff like. And then this is just these kind of systems. I don't have to, till this and all this, put all these inputs year after year after year, my inputs become less and less and less, and my yields get more and more and more. As it gets dialed in.
It's like the cultural restoration too of being able to share things at the college and in the community.
Yeah.
And how it brings like,
community together.
And all these things to people, and it's restoring this like greater and more intangible ecosystem of our society just by doing it.
Yep, exactly. Thank you so much for coming. So that's in a nutshell, but I'm happy to share any more.
Do you have the clay soil here on your farm?
That we are actually quite blessed by having a really beautiful sandy loam.
Okay.
So we did not have to struggle with that as much as I had several design clients where that's been a major issue. So, and I addressed that several ways. If it's larger open space, the Keyline ripping works. If it's smaller, more intricate space, I advocate for tillage crops. So crops that have really deep, tenacious taproots like burdock, daikon, parsnip, other annual or biannual crops that will, like you just spread it like a cover crop seed on there and it'll just drill down and then rot. And then that creates porosity and space for worms to make it in, water, air, that kind of thing. And over time, like you do those cover crops in a stage succession, and that will slowly break up and add organic matter to the soils. But in clay is actually very nutrient rich.
Oh yeah.
It just doesn't have the air and the water holding capacity. And so clay is ideal to work into a treed system.
Oh, we have the sandy loam here. And the water just goes.
Yeah. So then it's like adding more clay and organic matter to hold that water.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I had a question about the water, retaining water, if you just have some just very flat areas. So we on the property we just bought, we do have where I think would be great to do some Keyline swales, but then we have just a lot of really flat land. So what are strategies for getting?
Well, there's a couple. So if it's, I mean, there's nothing truly flat except for like a salt flats. So there's some kind of contour, some kind of slope. No, and so one is, first of all, you have to evaluate what your catchment is. So where's your water coming from? Is it coming from off-site, down a hillside? Is it migrating? Where's your wet spots? You look at plants that indicate wet areas, rushes and buttercup, and there's numerous plants that indicate wetter areas. You can augment that by doing some features that direct water to the spots that you want. Oftentimes, if it's an established place, you can get your water from hard surfaces, roads, roofs, barns. Even some clients some of the low-hanging fruit is like gray water systems. You're recycling during the drier months. You're still showering and washing your clothes and doing this other stuff. So run that through a gray water system reed bed and then put that into your pond, right? But you don't have to put a pond in a keyline location, like in the valley or whatever. You can do what's called a pocket pond, or in Australia they call it a turkey nest. It's just like dig a hole in the ground and spread the dirt around the edge, and then direct anything you can get into that location, and it'll fill up in the wet season. Provide a way for the water to get into it, provide a nice exit for it. You don't have to have it in a keyline spot. I mean, you're going to get more bang for your buck if you do. But, this one place we did, it actually, it's not so good, but they had tons of roof area. It wasn't the best area, but we could easily just dig a hole in the ground and spread that fill around the edge. And say but there's a technique, you scrape all the topsoil, you put it over here, you get to that subsoil, you re-sculpt the surrounding area, you bring all that topsoil back and you spread it all around the edges. So you're maintaining your topsoil area, and then your lower area is often more dense subsoil, hopefully clay-ish. You only really need about 30% clay content to get a good seal on your pond area. And then just direct everything you got, any kind of road surface, roof collection, gray water system, into that location. So like I was saying before, flat areas, you have more option, because if it's flat and you got a good catchment here, you could put your pond over there, you could put your pond over there, just depending, you just dig your swale. It only takes, an ideal fall is 1 foot per 100 feet of run. So one foot drop per 100 feet of run, and that's what I consider a conveyance stitch, actually. It's falling that direction. It's not going to run fast, but it's just going to trickle that direction. So it doesn't take much on a flat land to just move whichever direction you want the water to go. If you want it in the middle, you just it's wherever if you're doing a swale system, you make your berm, you have your ditch, and you just put your spillway wherever you want it to overflow and come out. You could, anywhere along that whole line, you could have it exit. So once you put it into that kind of system, you can move it anywhere. So a lot of options. Well, it sits there, but when it's full, it overflows here, or there, or there, and then the rest of that just soaks in. So there is an art and a science to figuring out your water catchment, what's your watershed, how much inches of rain do you get per year, what's your soil type, different soils, forests will absorb almost 90% of the water, whereas a roadscape or a gravel road is going to run off 90% of the water. So pastures might absorb 40%, 50%, 60%, depends on your pasture. So you kind of, figure out your percentage, your areas, and calculation of your catchment, and then kind of roughly, I don't do it exact. I go, okay, approximately we're going to get so many thousand gallons of water in a peak event over this much time, and then I'll install something and we'll see how it goes. And you can augment that or delete it or something and change as necessary.
Thanks so much, Brian.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for coming.